Welcome to Women Lead, a production of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, Inc. We are your hosts. My name is Michelle Austin Pammies.
And I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks.
And I'm Kathy Eggleston, and we have a wonderful show for you today. Our show today is about social justice in America. Where are we now? The unfortunate murder of George Floyd in 2020, shown on camera for the entire world to see, rocked the world. Protests sprang out all around the world by people of all races, all religions, all walks of life, and showed that Americans were disgusted by the police violence that they witnessed and that Black lives indeed matter.
Yes, Kathy, Black lives indeed mattered, and we saw it play out all over the world. Social justice is generally understood as a political and philosophical concept which holds that all people should have access to wealth, health, well-being, justice, and opportunity. And it is essentially a concept of equity.
For there to be equity, what does that mean? For instance, if two people on different sides of a town contract COVID-19 with the same symptoms, with one person being wealthy and the other being poor, should the poor person die simply because that person could not afford to seek medical attention? I have a story to share. About 2 months ago, my cleaning lady passed away. She was more than a cleaning lady. She had become family. She had been working with the family for 30 years, worked with my mother, my brother, and myself. And she passed away because she had COVID-19 and she never got a test. She ended up in the hospital when she could no longer breathe and passed away almost immediately. I also had COVID-19, but I was able to get the monoclonal antibodies. But for that, maybe I too would have passed away. So it's clearly showing what it's like when one person gets health care and the other one doesn't.
Well, Michelle, what you're describing is healthcare, social justice, and equity issues. However, there are so many other examples as well, which can deal with whether you can get a bank loan if you're Black or Hispanic or any other minority, or whether you can have access to clean water. I mean, let's think of Flint, Michigan, and other areas of the country where there are, terrible environmental issues that exist. And so I'm happy that we're having a real conversation about social justice in America today.
Yes, it's a much needed conversation, and we can't have that conversation without talking about our young people. Historically, through the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War protests, on to today, where our young people put their bodies in the streets to protest. Young people have always been at the forefront of the conversation about social justice. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Tameka Bradley Hobbs, Assistant Provost of Florida Memorial University and the brainchild behind its new Social Justice Institute.
And we'll be right back after these messages with Dr. Tameka Bradley Hobbs.
It's no secret that women often feel mistreated when it comes to automotive buying and repair experiences. Join our empowering community on Instagram for tips and information on car care catered to women by women at 4x4 Women. Now, enjoy the following instructional video brought to you by the specialists at South Day Toyota.
My name is Elizabeth Ramos here at South Day Toyota as a service advisor. Today's topic is going to be what happens when we don't change the AC filter. So the AC filter is located in the glove box. Its main function is to clean all the dirt that goes inside the car. Once the filter gets dirty, all the dust that goes into the filter is now going to your lungs. So now it's going to affect your health. So we recommend it to replace the filter, or at least check it every time you come to service. If you would like us to check the filter, call us at the phone number, or you can book an appointment online at southdaytoyota.com. Remember, we're here to serve you.
The Florida Lottery is proud to support education by contributing billions of dollars to Florida schools and awarding countless Bright Future scholarships so Florida students can do more than just dream of a brighter future. They can create one. Learn more at flalottery.com.
Welcome back. The concept for the Social Justice Institute and the only HBCU in South Florida came from our guest, Dr. Tameka Hobbs, Associate Provost for Academic Affairs at Florida Memorial. She's a historian and the author of the award-winning book called Democracy Abroad, Lynching at Home, Racial Violence in Florida. Thank you, Dr. Hobbs, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
The way the Social Justice Institute came to exist at Florida Memorial University was you seeing the Floyd protest and deciding that a mere statement from the university would simply not be enough. Was the university instantly on board, or was persuasion required?
Like many individuals and institutions, after the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, last year, Florida Memorial University was searching for its response. But for me, the idea of the Social Justice Institute was actually born back in 2012 with the murder of Trayvon Martin. That year was my first year as a faculty member teaching history at Florida Memorial. I'm the mother of two young sons at the time. I am also working on my manuscript, which deals with lynching and racial violence in the state of Florida. And for me, it was all about trying to figure out what I can do from my positionality to be a part of the change. And over the last several years, I've had the opportunity to partner with Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin. I'd helped be a liaison to bring the Trayvon Martin Foundation to Florida Memorial University. We have collaborated on programs with them. We have brought in the Dream Defenders and other social justice practitioners over the years to speak to the student body, to put on programs for the community. And so as we contemplated last year as the university leadership what we could do in this moment, it was then that I resurfaced the plan for the Social Justice Institute that I've been working on for the past 5 or 6 years. And our intent with this at Florida Memorial University in establishing the Social Justice Institute is to create a solutions-focused think tank that can be a part of the change, that can bring together the intellectual resources we have with our faculty and students, along with the material resources of our campus, to be a part of the change that we so sorely need, both in Miami Gardens and in the county, and beyond that throughout the state of Florida. So I'm really excited that this venture is off to a great start. I want to thank you so much, Bernadette, for your willingness to serve as a member of our advisory board. We're really glad to have you. And you've been a real blessing in terms of the resources and the conversations that you've helped to shape. But I portend really wonderful things to come out of this initiative, both for our campus, for Miami Gardens.
Dr. Hobbs, the current White House administration is the first to ever use the words white supremacy in any address to the public. What, if any, impact do you think the Biden-Harris administration's anti-racism platform is having or will have on other universities and institutions by its intentional use of language to name this cancerous problem?
I am actually very encouraged by what I see coming out of the Biden-Harris administration. On day one, we saw President Biden sign an executive order that was calling out racial inequality in America. And when you think about the contrast between what we've seen in the previous administration, you had someone who co-signed on the ideas of white supremacy, whether that was explicitly or implicitly, to now have someone in the White House who understands the true scope of the problem, who has named in this executive order the issue of systemic racism. It's really quite significant. Not only does he talk about systemic racism, but he acknowledges the historic reasons for these disparities and is positioning his administration to throw the resources behind the initiative. He has pinpointed Susan Rice to head the Domestic Policy Council, who's going to lead the effort that's outlined in the executive order. He has mandated that the Office of Management and Budget use its resources to support Ms. Rice in the work that she is going to undertake. And so I'm really encouraged by what I see coming out of this administration and what that dictates. It means that at the federal level, you're going to have an administration that's going to do this deep dive and investigate disparities, to really dig into the data, to do an assessment on where it stands and its practices as it undertakes and as it relates to racial equity. I think it is a very powerful model that I would want to see echoed, not only from the federal government, but when I think about state government, when I think about county government, city government. This is a model that can be deployed at many different levels. It can even be replicated in the business community. And so I think with this type of federal leadership, we are standing on the forefront of something that's quite significant, probably in a position to be able to make some major change towards true equality and equity in a way that we haven't seen perhaps since the 1970s and 80s. So I stand greatly encouraged. Beyond that, when I look at President Biden's initiative and what he outlined on the campaign as a part of his Lift Every Voice plan for Black America, there were some really robust policy recommendations that were a part of that document, especially as it concerned economic justice and economic parity for the Black community. I am really eager to see what else will come. Many people have expressed dissatisfaction with just the executive order. I think we just need to give President Biden and Vice President Harris a bit more time to bring to fruition the plans that they've outlined as a part of their campaign. I'm excited.
Since the 2020 election, some state legislators, especially in purple states, have been pushing what is being referred to as backlash laws to discourage peaceful protests, suppress voting by people of color, and reward vigilantism. From a historical standpoint, since you are a historian, tell us what you know about the past and whether history is repeating itself, or is this something new?
Yes, these backlash laws. I was incredibly disappointed to see coming from Ron DeSantis' administration the proposal that was now on the table for what they're calling anti-protest and anti-riot initiatives. It strikes at our First Amendment rights to free speech, to organize, to petition a government, to demonstrate. And it is clearly aimed at the Black Lives Matter protesters. And so we all need to be paying attention to this and the infringement of on our liberties and rights as citizens as they are represented in this particular bill. The term backlash is an interesting one. I actually like one that comes from Carol Anderson. She's a professor of history at Emory University and author of the book White Rage. She uses a term called whitelash. And in her book, White Rage, the untold story of racial divide in America, which we're actually using as a part of our second installment for the South Florida Social Justice Common Read, she lays out for us, since the time of emancipation, the way that white Americans have reacted with violence that is not only physical, but sometimes violence in the form of policy to stymie and to push back any perceived gains of Black people in particular in this country. And so if you want to understand where we are now, if you want to understand pieces of legislation like the one we're discussing with Governor DeSantis, if you want to understand what happened at the Capitol and the insurrection on January the 6th, it's important that we understand these historic patterns of behavior that work towards the maintenance of white supremacy. And it's really important that we name this phenomena of white supremacy, this really dangerous and cancerous ideology that is really showing its face in a way that's quite undeniable these days. We have to understand it if we're ever going to challenge it, if we ever are going to move forward as a nation in a different direction. And so I think it's really important that we pay attention and that we study and understand the historical trend so that we can deal with it in its contemporary form.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tameka Bradley Hobbs, Associate Provost for Academic Affairs at Florida Memorial University, and we'll be right back.
The Florida Lottery is proud to support education by contributing billions of dollars to Florida schools and awarding countless Bright Future scholarships so Florida students can do more than just dream of a brighter future. They can create one. Learn more at flalottery.com.
Welcome back to Women Lead. Today our show is about social justice in America. Where are we now? I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks, and my co-hosts are Kathy Eggleston and Michelle Austin Pammies, and today we have with us Nancy Abudu, the Deputy Legal Director of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Welcome, Nancy.
Hello, Bernadette. Thank you for having me.
Nancy, the Southern Poverty Law Center recently released its annual report entitled Year in Hate and Extremism. With hate groups associating themselves with violent movements like QAnon, the Proud Boys, and the Boogaloo Boys, without being card-carrying members of any particular extremist group. Has this made your identification and mobilization work more difficult?
There is no question that it has been much more difficult to track organized hate groups, especially because the pandemic has caused a lot of them to take advantage of social media when it comes to expressing and disseminating their hate and extremist beliefs that are often only grounded in conspiracy theories and misinformation, and then their attempts to further spread disinformation. And so the level of political violence that we've seen increase, especially during the 2020 election cycle and culminating in the January 6th insurrection, is only an example of the level of behavior that these individuals really want to exercise in terms of creating fear and intimidation in all communities, but especially in communities of color. And so some of the recommendations that we made in our report, Year in Hate, include a stronger domestic prevention terrorism act that would allow for interagency data sharing to identify and really monitor and expose, and where necessary, prosecute individuals who are engaged actively in terroristic activities against the United States and against residents living in this country. The other thing that we want to do is overall expand interagency data sharing so that we can better identify indeed who is involved or behind a lot of these terrorist activities and who is promoting the kind of, again, misinformation and disinformation that is fomenting so much discord in our communities and in our states today. We've also been looking at efforts to increase education opportunities, for example, in the Department of Education, and making sure they have the resources necessary to really combat systemic racism. That's manifested, for example, in the Confederate symbols and statues that we continue to see in state legislature, capitals, and other state government buildings or property, which we believe, and I think has been clearly demonstrated, only further this notion, this false notion of white supremacy, and that this is a country only for white people, rather than the melting pot that America has been and should be celebrated for.
Being able to exercise the right to vote has been one of the social justice issues that should hold dear to all Americans. Nancy, following the 2020 election, there have been several bills brought before state legislatures throughout the United States intended to suppress voting rights of Black and brown people particularly. What's being done to push back at these voter suppression efforts?
The 2020 elections and the 2021 runoffs in Georgia resulted in historic turnout, both in terms of voter registration and mobilization, which of course resulted in not only the electoral results that we saw, but also renewed invigoration, I think, within the electorate in terms of why elections are important and why it is critical for them to participate. Unfortunately, the backlash from state legislators has been a slate of repressive legislation that is designed and absolutely will have the result in suppressing the vote, especially of communities of color, senior citizens, young people, and people who have lower income status. And so what we're seeing so far is that over 100 bills have been introduced that would achieve these kind of suppressive results. And in Georgia alone, we know that there have been 44 election-related bills introduced, many of them regressive. And so we believe that even 100 bills is probably an undercount in terms of the backlash that we're seeing around the country on the legislative front. For us, we're especially concerned with bills like we see in Georgia, where as a result of so many people using effectively the absentee or vote by mail process, the state is now proposing a law that would require people to include a photo ID in their absentee ballot application, even though we know that there are significant numbers of people who lack an ID or an acceptable ID, and for sure lack access to opportunities of a photocopy machine or to make a photocopy for themselves. And then you have to multiply that with the fact that we're still in a pandemic. So we don't really know what the situation will be in terms of people being able to safely vote in person for any upcoming elections this year and maybe even into 2022. We've also seen bills in Mississippi that would purge voters from the rolls based on their voting history or failure to provide a piece of paper or respond to government mail. And so these are the types of legislative efforts that the Southern Poverty Law Center is pushing against, both in terms of testimony that we're providing, research and additional data to legislators so they understand the real impacts of what they're proposing, and then if necessary trying to challenge these laws if and when they are indeed passed. So we are for sure going to remain vigilant in opposing regressive legislation, and we encourage people to get involved and contact their legislators to make sure that these bills do not pass.
The Southern Poverty Law Center seeks justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. From where you sit, how has this pandemic impacted marginalized communities, both socially and economically?
The coronavirus pandemic has been absolutely devastating, not only for our country, but for communities of color in particular. And we saw that, especially in some of the southern states, the responses from our governors were not what they should have been. Instead of instituting strict CDC guidelines, mask policies, and social distancing policies, we saw governors like Georgia's Governor Kemp go the opposite direction and in fact try to penalize local officials like the mayor of Atlanta, who tried to institute these policies because her constituents were being most impacted by the virus. We've had millions of people die, millions more who are still sick, and unfortunately millions more who could contract this virus if we do not get a hold of it. And when it comes to the impact of the virus on the communities that the Southern Poverty Center works with, there can be no question that we've seen an impact in terms of the effectiveness of some of the work. We've seen that, for example, when it came to elections, when we tried to institute or expand absentee or vote by mail policies, we had pushback and actually had to sue states like Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana so that they could allow people who are either prone to getting the virus or caring for those who were in danger of contracting or already had the virus, so that they could exercise their right to vote safely. We also saw that prisoners in particular were extremely affected, and that instead of jails and prisons instituting policies that would allow for compassionate release of older or more elderly prisoners, or recognizing that some of the sentences were just too long, prisons overcrowded, and in order to keep the virus rates down, that it was important to institute other policies in the prisons and the jails. That wasn't happening either, and SPLC had to sue places like Alabama just to institute common sense policies that would reduce those who were contracting and therefore dying of the virus. We are continuing to work closely with our partners in making sure that our communities are as safe as possible. And that includes making sure that the racial disparities that continue to exist in terms of who is getting the virus are eliminated. So that's some of the work that we're doing to combat the continuing challenges that the coronavirus poses.
Thank you for joining us today, Nancy Abudu, and we'll be right back.
At the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, our mission is to enhance and expand leadership by women of color. We do this in a variety of different ways, including but not limited to providing mentorship opportunities for young professionals where we assist in helping to create paths to leadership. We empower women to develop capacities for social change. We produce programs that promote heritage awareness, and we provide training opportunities for business and government. Our institute holds seminars focused on professional success techniques, and we host many other events such as our popular Advocates for Change and Leaders Connect. The Women of Color Empowerment Institute publishes a magazine called Women Lead. Our signature event is the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, a yearly conference where hundreds of leaders gather from all across the United States and beyond. To learn more about membership and how you can support our programs or be a sponsor of the Women Lead TV, visit us at nationalwomenofcolor.com. Again, that's nationalwomenofcolor.com. Welcome back to Women Lead. Today, ladies, this show was so powerful.
I agree. In particular, social justice right now is the hot topic, whether you're calling it racial equity, whether you're recognizing, as the government is now doing, that there is such a thing as white supremacy. They're all very important issues, and I'm glad we were able to talk about them today.
And once more, I have got to call out our young people for leading this conversation with their bodies and their minds. The future is bright.
The future is bright. Until the next time, ladies, be empowered.